Hi everyone, this is For the Love of Comics, and in today's live stream, we're going to be looking at a handful of books that I've read recently, although not very recently. It's been a while since I've made a recent reads video, so it's been over the last 3 months or 4 months, and I've read some more books, but I want to talk about three that really stood out to me. And I'm doing it on the live stream because I've enjoyed this experience of being able to show you the book top down while I talk about it. Although you never know when that mechanism is going to fail. I also did want to mention that if you're watching this live, I'm actually doing two live streams today. There's going to be this one right here, and in a couple of hours, 2 hours from when they started, I'm going to be over on Highland G's channel chatting with Highland G, the comic board, and Off My Shelves. We had a chat some weeks ago, and that I had a great time. It's just four comics YouTubers talking about comics, buying comics, collecting comics, reading comics, and just anything that crosses our mind. So it's a much, it's a really laid back conversation, which I invite you to join in case you still have time and energy and stamina for more after this one. Also, if you're watching this later, I'll have the link to Highland G's video as well, so be sure to check that out. All right, let's get started. So, a couple of books that I talked about recently on another live stream that I was invited to over on La Rasa's channel. So, La Rasa, Comic Crack, Sleepy Reader, and Gore Vidal have a weekly chat that goes around on their channels, and it's something it takes place rather late at night on Sunday for me to catch the whole thing live, but I always try to get at least to the first hour, the first half an hour if I'm really tired, and catch up on it later. And it's a great conversation, and they talk about books that they've read recently, and they invited me to join them, and I'll have that link below as well. So I talked about a couple of books over there, so if you want to see me talk about these in detail, head on over to that video. But I just wanted to quickly mention them, and because this is For the Love of Comics, the first book that I wanted to make a quick mention of is Usagi Yojimbo. Now, let me... All right, here we go. So this is volume 2 of the new IDW series. So Usagi Yojimbo has moved from Dark Horse, I think it's a couple of years now. Well, there are two trades out, maybe last year, and these are now being published in color, which is not which is unusual because Usagi Yojimbo has always been a black and white series, although it has had color specials and the Mirage run of 16 issues between Fantagraphics. When Usagi was at Fantagraphics and at Dark Horse, it was at Mirage Studios, and all 16 of those issues were color. So it's definitely been in color before. Some of the stories in Dark Horse Presents were color stories. So it's not at all unusual or grating, and I don't have anything new to say about Usagi Yojimbo that I have not said before, but that's not going to stop me, and I will have one of the videos I want to make is a detailed look at a particular Usagi Yojimbo story. But in case you still are not reading Usagi Yojimbo, and part of it is you're being intimidated by how many volumes and how many stories there are out there, either one of these volumes will make a fine book to start with. In particular, sorry, this is the second volume, Homecoming. In particular, in the second volume, there's a particular story that is for Usagi fans and for people who've been reading Usagi Yojimbo a long time. It's a very interesting story because it brings things around in a circle that Usagi's saga has actually circled a couple of times. It's him returning home and meeting Mariko, his childhood sweetheart, and the man that she's married to now, a childhood rival for her affections, and their son. And that family bit of anchoring for this wandering Ronin is always an interesting and complex story. So that story over here is, I think, rightfully lauded as wow, what a fantastic Usagi Yojimbo story this is. But I was equally impressed by the complete standalone, no history required, no context needed, perfect introductions to Usagi Yojimbo that also make up this volume. In particular, let me see if I can get this to work. Can you see this? I know you guys are on a little bit of a lag. So here is the story I'm talking about. Tatami. It's not the first one. Yes, it is. So it's a two-part story, and it is Tatami Part 1. Wait, can you see this? I'm not sure if I am showing the right thing. I think you can. All right, never mind. It's this lag that confuses me. Tatami Part 1 is a story that starts with this narration of how these reeds are harvested and prepared and selected and dried and woven together and stacked and then cut. It's this incredibly detailed, including close-ups of this story that seems to be about, you know, a piece of Japanese culture for the first 3 pages. And then you have the introduction of our hero. These mats are what the story is named after. And the fact that it takes 2 years to prepare these mats, and they've been specially ordered by a lord who needs to do a particular tea ceremony in order to make the emperor's envoy happy. It seems so steeped in cultural details and particulars that you would think it would be slightly alien, but this is the beautiful thing about Usagi Yojimbo. It takes all of this and it doesn't need you to have any previous context. It creates that world for you. You understand about honor and you understand about disgrace, and you suddenly feel the weight of this ceremony and how important it is to the politics of this time and this region, and the fact that it is an guarded envoy to make sure that these mats get there. And then there is a tribe of assassins, ninjas who have been hired to make sure these mats don't get there. All of these things done in this signature, elegant, action-packed, beautiful art style. But the characters in it are what, again, define what a good story it is. There is one guard captain who is in charge of getting this there, and he only appears for, even in this short story, maybe a third of it. And he's an indelible character, and how his future and his life is staked to this transport of mats is phenomenally done, because I had no doubt in my mind at all about how what the stakes were and how dangerous things were and how much they mattered. At the same time, I was getting history, I was getting cultural unique things that I am not familiar with, but I'm being made familiar with by the story, while the story now plays with that. So that's the kind of stuff that the best detective stories, the best science fiction stories they do, where they give you the context which you're not familiar with and then use it to tell a story at the same time. It's not just about the presentation. And that, I just thought, was a terrific example of how good Usagi Yojimbo is at capturing place and time and character and action and tension and stakes. Especially for a new reader. I don't think you need to have read anything else at all in order to read Tatami Part 1 and Part 2. And if you want to get hooked to Usagi Yojimbo, that's, I think, a great story to do that with. Right, so that was one of the first. That was one of the first things that I talked about over there in that other live stream. And another work that I've recently read. Well, I wouldn't say I've recently read the whole thing. I'm only part of the way through it. Is Alaxina by Jose Munoz and Carlos Sampaio. And I wanted to talk about this on that live stream because Gore Vidal is responsible, as he is on so many occasions, on informing me about Munoz and Sampaio. I had not heard of them before. I had seen Alaxina mentioned by commenters in a previous live stream when I was talking about Torpedo, which was another book that Earl Grey's videos introduced me to. So Earl Grey has a video on Alaxina, and I would heartily encourage everyone to check that out. The art style in this is what initially caught my eye. It's very unique, and given the length of time over which Munoz worked, I've heard, and I'm no scholar, but I can completely see the influences on people like Eduardo Risso or even Frank Miller, perhaps. The drawings in this are extremely evocative. They're not necessarily true to life, and yet another, if needed, yet another piece of proof that fidelity to reality isn't really what makes great drawing. At least I don't think so. I mean, I think it's about what it creates as a mood, and these are stories with violence, these are stories with darkness at the center. There's stories with all kinds of characters who have not necessarily the prettiest of motives or the prettiest of ways of behaving. And also what really I wasn't expecting it, it's extremely political. And this is something that's interesting in artistic things. Sometimes people being very overtly political, very overtly having a political stance may come across as detrimental to story, detrimental to things. But it really is a question of skill, because I think I was astonished by how overt a particular political point of view is. And honestly, if your political point of view is in resisting a dictatorship or resisting military coups and things like that, you're not really talking about a political. I mean, I think most people would be fine saying that, yes, that's not a political thing, that's a human thing. But I think that's the kind of argument all political writing will say, that it's essentially human. But my point is that I was surprised by the fact that not only was there a very strong political content as far as the story setting, as far as the way the characters interact with each other, as far as the reasons why they're doing things, and the backdrop, it's with the story Nicaragua in particular. I was also very surprised to see that there was, in the middle of this story, a puppet show that takes up a number of pages. And I talked about this a little bit, and I found that to be a very interesting choice, where you just completely stop the story and have this puppet show take place, a puppet show that's happening in this world of the story, and then give that to the readers for page after page after page. It can be trying to some people's patience. People might feel, what is this doing here? But I thought the way that it was pulled off in this was just terrific, because although that question did come up in my mind as it went on, and then when it returned to the story, it became clear to me why it was there. And I'm not going to get into any spoilers, but it's definitely woven into the narrative in a way that I admired. And in particular, at the end of that story, Nicaragua, the last panel showed two puppets saying, thank you for attending. This was a Munoz and Sampaio puppet show. So again, I really appreciated that rather overt thing of, well, there was this puppet show, there was a political statement inside the story, and this story ends by us saying this was our puppet show for you, the reader. You don't often see such direct addresses, or not such direct addresses thrown in just a little bit where it isn't there everywhere else. And I was admiring of the fact that it didn't stand out like a gimmick, but I understood that they themselves are putting together a story for you and me to read in order to get their polemical, political point of view across. And that sort of embracing of it was something that I really admired, among other things. All right, so I'm just checking on the chat. No questions about any of this. Good to see everyone here. In case I didn't say hi to you before we started, hello, welcome. I have just mentioned really quickly two books that I talked about in a previous live stream that I will link for you guys. But the books that I want to talk about today are two new reads and one reread, a revisitation of something that I have not only read but made a video on. I'll just get to that in a minute. But the first book I want to talk about is The Little Prince by Joann Sfar. There we go. This is an English translation of a French comic. I don't know if it was published in one volume or in multiple volumes, but this is obviously an adaptation of the famous prose book, or well, illustrated prose. And I picked this up primarily because of what seemed to me like a perfect marriage of story and a writer-artist, because Joann Sfar is a favorite of mine. I have talked about Joann Sfar on a couple of occasions now. I talked about The Rabbi's Cat in my top 10 gateway comics, and it still holds up. I think I made that video a long time ago, but I think The Rabbi's Cat is an enchanting comic, and it's such a smart comic, and it's such a wise comic that that you know, it really does fill my heart with warmth to think about how generous and open-hearted the spirit of that comic is in investigating faith and relationships and culture and family and things like that. Things that, I mean, much of literature is about, but to do it with a funny and sarcastic and sardonic thing, but also be loving and tender of it. I think that balance is something that Joann Sfar achieved in A Rabbi's Cat that I found to be marvelous. And I also talked about Vampire Loves by Joann Sfar. Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen my comics roulette episode, the only one I've made so far, although maybe I'll make a few more, in which I rolled dice to randomly pluck a comic from the shelves, and it ended up being Vampire Loves, and I talked about that. So check out those videos for my detailed views on those stories. But both of those stories, plus other Joann Sfar I've read, which is the first volume of Klezmer. There isn't a lot of his stuff translated, but I've tried to pick up as much. There's his work with Emmanuel Goubet and with Louis Trondheim, their collaborations on Dungeon. There are so many wonderful, quirky comics that Sfar has created or been part of, and they all, whether they are a D&D spoof like Dungeon, or whether they are klezmer about music, about well, faith in the Rabbi's Cat, but also vampires and relationships and boyfriends and girlfriends and dating, kind of things of Vampire Loves. No matter what his area of focus, he seems to be interested in conversations, and his stories really come from the conversations, and the conversations create a picture of who these characters are, but it also creates their movement in the world around them. So it's, I mean, there are parts of Vampire Love that feel like a vampire version of the Before Sunset, Before Sunrise movies, in which it's just people talking and then flying in the air and going to a belfry or something and talking some more. And it's very interesting to me how much narrative he's able to get out of conversation, and that's why I thought it was such a good match, because The Little Prince, I have to admit I hadn't read the prose book in many years, but it is a book. The prose book is a book about conversations. It's about ideas, but it's also about the exchange of ideas, and that's the approach that Sfar has throughout this. It is those series of conversations given their weight and given their focus by this. It's all illustrated over here, but with that very equal weight democratic 6 panels a page approach. And I think this is something that he has in I think all of his books. I was trying to find a couple of them before this, but I couldn't in time for this stream. But I'm pretty sure that this is the way a lot of his comics look. And what that does is it gives you that pause on every single panel, no matter if it's got this much text or this little text. And it works really well for a book like this, which is about moments, and it's about the progression of moments through talking and through thinking about what one talked about and having questions and looking at those answers. So that kind of pacing I thought was very interesting. I don't know many people who would pace it like that, especially when they're writing a comic book, but it makes sense because it's hard to think of how else you would adapt this book, because this is not again, from my vague memories of the prose book, it's not a realistic book by any means. It's in the language of fables and legends and myths. It's not interested in spelling out every single detail and painting every single part of the world. It's about isolation and looking at only one thing and having one element very theatrically, so it creates a bare stage and gives you one thing and one person, and then one person talks and interacts with one other person. It's that kind of a story. So the way that Sfar has captured what I thought of as the innocence and the wisdom of what the book I think is famous for. I mean, I'm sure people can critique it and say that it's all faff. But for people who love the book and the reasons why they love the book, honestly speaking, I don't have very strong feelings about the prose book one way or the other. I read it once when I was young, but when I was reading this comic, again, maybe it's because of my bias towards Sfar, or because I understand the kind of stories he's written before. Even though this is not technically his story, it is very much exactly what I was expecting it to be. A very good match between the material to be adapted and the person adapting it. So especially I think if you're a fan of the novel, if you're a fan of the prose book, I would definitely recommend this. I think you'll have, I could remember this was probably a favorite moment for many readers. This was probably a good scene. You know, those were the kind of thoughts going through my head when I was looking through this book. So if you're a fan, you definitely should check it out. If you're not a fan, I don't know, give it a shot. Maybe this will be an interesting experiment for you to see if adapting into the comics medium changes how you feel about something in prose. I know it's certainly happened that way with movies, but I think of them as completely separate things. I don't think the book and the movie are the same at all. I'm not so sure about comics. I mean, I know that they're different things. I just mean that there are closer connections, and then there are things that you can sort of, you're like, oh, I'm glad that's gone from the prose, or I'm glad that's illustrated rather than me reading, you know, a turgid paragraph describing it. There can be good trade-offs between mediums while still maintaining a very similar identity. So I don't know how that would work if you really dislike the book, but I still think it's a comic worth checking out, and I'm really glad I got it. It was very enjoyable, and I think it is something that you can pick up and read 2 pages of and 3 pages of. I think the prose book is that way as well. You know, you can open it for inspirational quotes or something like that. And I'm pretty sure the comic will work the same way too, if that's the way you'd like to use it. So that's The Little Prince by Joann Sfar. Hello. Good to see everyone over here. The red balloon is a good, it's a great thing to put The Little Prince in together with. I think there were a couple of books like that in my childhood head, I think got all grouped together, because there was a whole bunch of people in school or your friends who would say, oh, this is a life-changing book, you know, and just like, and one book. I'm always suspicious when people are only all about one book. I mean, I love many books, but like, this is the book that'll change your life, or this is the book that you make into the text that rules your life. So there used to be a bunch of those, and I don't know if they're all the same quality. I think Jonathan Livingston Seagull was one of them. So The Little Prince was one of them, but they're very different works, and I'm sure the other ones were as well. But I don't know. I'm glad to see this adaptation of it, and because I do think it works as an enchanting thing. Good to see everyone who's new in the chat. Sorry, I said that I'll say my hellos and then I'll battle along, because this is not the only live stream I'm on tonight. But I just finished talking about The Little Prince, and I see Sleepy Reader in the comments. Hi, I mentioned Usagi Yojimbo and Alaxiner a little bit before this as well. Let's see, what should we talk about next? The next book that I have over here is not The Little, it's The Grot by Pat Grant. And this is a book that I have talked about before and talked about in detail. So I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on this right now. If you're interested in my detailed thoughts on this book, my short thoughts are, I love it, and it was one of my favorite reads of last year, and I was really happy to read. The reason I'm talking about it here is because I just got a physical copy. So when I read it last year, I got a PDF from the author, because the book was being released at that time, but because of lockdown, etc. And he very kindly, Pat Grant, sent me a PDF of this, and I made a video called Blue and The Grot, 2 terrific comics by Pat Grant, because I was a fan of Pat Grant's Blue, which I read many years ago, I think 6 or 7 years before The Grot came out last year. So check out that video on Blue and The Grot. I think they're both terrific comics, but I did have a little bit of a, I read it on my computer screen in PDF format, and it was large and it was okay, but it wasn't the same thing. Regular viewers will know I'm not a big fan of digital reading. I'm not able to read digitally over a length of time, but I do give it a shot every now and then, and webcomics are different. That's always my disclaimer. I'm not talking about webcomics, I'm talking about print comics transferred into the digital format. But I really enjoyed The Grot, and it stuck in my head, and I definitely was going to get a print copy as soon as I could get my hands on it, as soon as became a much longer thing than expected. But here it is, and it's a nice, it's exactly why I want physical hard copies of things. The colors, the reproduction, the creaminess of the paper, it's not glossy, it's not matte, the way the images look, the isolated things versus the vistas. This is just, and again, I think on the PDF I read it page by page. There's just something about the 2-page thing, and I guess I can put it, of course, on a widescreen and read. I don't want this to become a diatribe against digital reading. I'm just talking about how much of a pleasure it was to reread this book in this format. And for those of you who haven't seen my previous video, or just want to, the way that I have unimaginatively, and I say unimaginative because I saw that this is actually part of their marketing literature, is it's like Mad Max meets Deadwood. To that I would add something like The Sting. So it's dystopian Australia in which there is no more fuel, there is no more energy other than what the human body can provide. So everything is pushed or pulled or pedaled, and the world has ended, and in a weird way, everything is rusting, all machinery is scrap essentially. Even when you have a ship like this, it's completely corroded, and this ship actually moves across this body of water because it is full of people pedaling, so it's kind of like a galley. So there are very interesting Australia dystopia things in it, but then there is a frontier town, and it's not a small frontier town. I think it's millions of people in this frontier town, which people are flocking to farm an algae that is more valuable than oil, more valuable than gold. That's the setup, and it's a terrific book. Everything about it worked for me. The art style, the writing, the nastiness at the center of it. It is a book called The Grot, but also its commentary on class. It's a look at what people do to survive, and we've seen these kind of stories before. So yeah, so another thing you can think of is like Oliver Twist, maybe, as far as street kids who are hustlers and con men, and it's all about confidence men trying to get the newly arrived people who have the money and tricking them, and there are prospectors and fake claims. It's brilliant in the way that Pat Grant has put this entire world together and then given us this story about people with money and people without money, and what they want to do with it, and who do we feel sorry for, who is a hero, those kind of things. So I loved rereading this in this format. I'm very glad that I got this physically. I've already recommended this book highly in my previous video. It's one of my favorite reads of last year. Check out The Grot if you haven't already, by Pat Grant, and check out Blue. All right, moving along quickly. This is a good clip. I'm quite impressed. Let's see. Do we have any questions about? Are you excited for Jason's new book? Yes, I am. It has been ordered. It has not yet arrived. So I've ordered Jason's new book and Box Brown's new book. Those were two books that I thought I could even make a video of, following up on Jason, following up on Box Brown. Then I realized I have a couple of Richard Sala books since I made my Richard Sala video, so I might need to have a video about catching up with people I've made videos on. Oh, and the new Tardi book, the Farewell Brinda one. That one is also, it may have actually arrived today. I haven't checked. No more questions. Everything on schedule. All right. And the last book that I'd like to talk about today is Incognegro by, let's see if I'm getting this. There we go. Incognegro by Matt Johnson and Warren Pleece. This is a hardcover published by Dark Horse under their Berger Books imprint. The imprint started by never mind. The imprint started by Karen Berger, or is it Berger? Let me know in the comments below. Sorry. It was a Vertigo book. That's how it was originally published, and I never read it in its Vertigo avatar. It has been reprinted. I think this is the 10th anniversary edition. This has also been around for a while. I think I may even have showed this on one of the bookshelves in when I was browsing that indie bookstore in Oak Park, Illinois. In that video, I think I ran across Incognegro then, and I'd heard about it, and friends online had recommended it. So I was glad to get this reprint, this new edition actually, because there are changes in it from the original. But I have to say that I was a little worried because, and I hadn't heard a lot about the book, but I knew it was about lynching and racial violence. And I just had, and this is what happens with very serious subject matter. I become nervous about how something would have handled it. I worry it might be exploitative, it might be reductive, it might be trite, it might be really off-putting in a way that's unfortunate and exacerbates something, and even good intentions. And I think there are a lot of those kind of things that we see all the time. I think some of the most egregious problems sometimes come from the noblest of intentions, and I was worried about that, and I was worried about how that was going to be portrayed, because I've seen that before. Live stream technology. Oh well. I'm sorry, I don't think that I can. I'm not able to show it. I'll show it to you over here. Here we go. All right. So I needn't have worried about Incognegro, is what I was saying. This was a terrific book. It is set in the 1920s, so it's a little earlier than I am. I think I've read a lot of material about, say, the civil rights movement in the 60s and the 70s, maybe even in the 50s, but the 1920s is not something that I've seen covered or I've read much of. The other thing is it also has the representation of African American people living in New York City and Harlem before it goes to the Deep South, or there's a vignette right at the beginning that's in the Deep South where the lynchings and where the violence is taking place, and then you come back to this, I mean, I wouldn't say affluent, but a different life in New York City in the 1920s. Again, something that I may not be that familiar with, where they're going to clubs and they're taking taxis home and all that stuff. Now, it is only for black people, and I mean, all of that stuff is fairly, I would say, very brutally presented. This is just taken as a matter of fact, but those are the couple of things that hooked me at the beginning: the time and the setting, and the fact that it was going to give me a couple of different settings, not just one, although most of it takes place in the Deep South. Now, this book is, I will have to say to anyone who is worried and squeamish or otherwise not comfortable with racial slurs, it is full of racial slurs. It's full of epithets that are slung by white people, by black people. It's against each other. It's prevalent in a way that to me feels authentic. But then again, I'm not vouching for its authenticity. What I'm responding to, I think, is its ability to create the world that it wants to create, which is one of ugliness, which is one of danger, which is one of incredible poison and vehemence and all of that stuff. But what I thought was the most surprising, the most for me, the most impressive thing about this book is, alongside all of that, it was a crackerjack murder mystery noir thriller. And it worked on all of those levels. It isn't something that coasts on its noble intentions. It isn't something that, because it's talking about an important thing, doesn't have to write something that is twisting and naughty and stuff like that. That's not to say that no one will be able to guess who did it or something like that, or the fact that it's a whodunit. It is a murder mystery, first and foremost. And the solving of a murder mystery, I think, and let me know if you think this is not right, but I think there are only so many ways you can go with that, right? It's either someone you have already met, or it's someone you have never met, And if it's someone you've never met, maybe they've been talked about and referenced, and her daughter died, and then you'll say, you are the daughter, aren't you? That person that we have only heard of. So there's somewhere in the middle, but so you're limited. So if you say that, oh, I knew who it was, I mean, statistically speaking, it's one of the people you've met, it's one of the people who you've encountered, so some people will be able to guess who it was. The point isn't about you won't be able to guess who did it. The point is, why is this mystery so thrilling? And the first thing is danger. Everything, I think, has danger if it wants, it needs danger if it wants to sell the thrills, if it wants you to care about the protagonist, so on and so forth. Over here, the danger, because you start with a lynching in the Deep South, a lynching that is described by a reporter who is there, including mutilation, and it's very graphic, the description. Because you start with that, you have a sense of what the danger is for if you're one of the people getting lynched. The next thing that you understand is this reporter is passing off as white, but is actually black. So immediately the tension is ratcheted up to, does he know what will happen to him if they find out, etc. That, and that's the Incognegro of the title. That's what it means, and it's apparently based on truth of people who were light-skinned enough to go undercover in the 1920s and break stories in New York and other cities about what was happening in an effort to shine a light on what was going on. So this undercover operator's life is already one that is incredibly dangerous, and then him investigating something in one of these regions. So then you've got all your, here's the sheriff and corruption and what's the machinery of this town. Not stuff that we haven't seen before, but done with an incredible sense of tension, because you are always aware of what's going to happen if someone gets found out. So that's one thing. The second thing is, and this is closer to that, do serious topics get handled properly all the time? One of the big problems that I've heard of is, with the good intentions, is the frame. The frame of a story, if you present people as victims. Now, you might be well-intentioned. You want to point out injustice. You want to shine a light on what's happening, so on and so forth. But if the only representation is as a victim, is as someone powerless, whose lives and futures and everything is in the hands of somebody else, that's also a type of stereotype. Now, how are you going to write a story about lynchings in the Deep South in the 1920s and not present oppression and still try to avoid this victim, powerless? That's a very delicate balance, and I think it's difficult at the best of times to do. And then you want to write something that is a potboiler, you want to write something that's thrilling, you're making things really difficult for yourself. But this story, I was very happy to see achieved it all. And that to me was its great achievement, that it did not create victims, it did not create help. I mean, yes, the people you meet are all at different levels of power and empowerment, but they're still individual characters. And the fact that there's someone who is waiting to be lynched, who's hours away from death, who's more worried about his woman cheating on him, or about what happened to the money that he hid. The fact that they're complete human beings who have accepted certain things and are worried about certain other things, whose priorities don't match your priorities as the reader, and the fact that even in the most dire of circumstances, there's humor and there is some sort of happiness or a joke that can be shared. It feels extremely authentic. It doesn't feel like someone painting it from the outside as purely a dark tale. They are talking about human beings in human situations, and human beings are funny and do make jokes in weird situations. Human beings do have peculiar, and that's the kind of thing that this book does over and over again. And that surprised me. That's not what I was expecting. So the fact that it was thrilling, the fact that the murder mystery worked really well, the fact that it was full of tension, and the fact that it was able to create fully realized characters who we were scared for and we were worried about because the danger was never ever in doubt, all of these things put together made Incognegro a remarkable book. Now, I have to say, I've heard about Incognegro and I've heard people talk highly of it, and it got a 10-year anniversary edition, which doesn't happen with every book. But I've never heard of it as like, wow, that is amazing. Maybe that's just because I don't read the right kind of reviews, but I really was blown away by it. I've read it twice in quick succession, but I put enough gap in there to give it myself some time to process it. But it's so clever in how it takes themes like, why would someone impersonate why would someone pretend to be someone they're not? And it's a murder mystery and it's a noir, so everyone is pretending to be someone they're not. The person investigating them has the biggest stakes, we think, because he's a black man impersonating a white man in a place where lynchings are happening, trying to investigate lynchings. But the fact that that is also true in very different ways for the other characters, it creates these kind of mirrors and echoes that I thought was very adroit and very clever and very satisfying. It satisfied, the cerebral part of me, and it satisfied the gut, like, ooh, violence, and how is he going to get out of this pickle? And you're always going to have an investigator who's out of their depth, and how much more out of your depth do you get as a private investigator? Shared images with me. From what I've seen, that looks more like Berlin by Jason Lutz or Adrian Tominez drawings, like completely clean, no fill-in, no shading, no grays, from what I've seen. So this, and I've seen page-to-page comparisons. I couldn't put them together. But I like this. I'm not usually, I've not tended to be a fan of new things, additions in classic works and things like that. But this shading, you can make jokes about black and white and things like that, but this shading really adds depth and dimension, and I don't think the previous... it's the same artwork. It's only the shading. It's only the blacks and the grays, I think, that's been changed. But from what I've seen, I really like how this looks and how this turned out. So yes, I find Incognegro to be one of those like hidden gems. Even though it is a praised book, I was astonished by it. I was really taken aback at how good it was and what a good mystery it was and how twisted it was. And I would love to see more people work with genre in this way. Not exactly in this way, but it shows that you can do it. You don't have to compromise on one thing because you want to do the other thing. You don't have to make light of something that is serious by making it entertainment, and something that is thrilling, something that is truly edge of your seat can also be very soulful, can be very cerebral. So that's really the reason why I love finding works like that. We know we have our masterpieces of genre and masterpieces of serious literature, but the best ones are always the ones that put both of those two things together and don't compromise on either. And I do think that Incognegro is one of those. Well, here we go. That's what we have for today on this live stream. As I said before, I've been off for a while, but I have been doing a couple of guest live streams, and I will be doing one later on. In fact, in exactly 1 hour from now, over on Highland G's channel, I'll be joining Highland G, the comic board, Off My Shelves, for a chat. I don't know what it's about. So in case you haven't had enough already, come over there and join us. And thank you so much for watching. This has been For the Love of Comics, and I'll see you at the next video. Bye.